Hey, it's Karen. I wanted to say hello and talk to you a little bit today about theater equity, joining equity, when's the right time to join equity, what the EMC program is, and if that might be a good alternative to kind of rushing to join equity, and just a little bit about the theater landscape in general. So we're going to get started. So the big question that we always get is, I'm going to make this a little bit bigger, um, is how do we join equity? So there are three ways that you can join equity. So the first way is the most obvious, which is to get an equity contract. so, everybody thinks of it a little bit like maybe it's a catch-22 when really it's not. So non-union people audition for theater all the time. And somebody is always, making their Broadway debut, whether it's a child, a 20-something-year-old, a 30-something-year-old, a 40-something-year-old, or adults, almost in every Broadway show that I go to. There's a list of people making their Broadway debut. So they got it by being a non-union person, auditioning for a Broadway show, and they got a contract. So it is absolutely possible to do. The second way is by being a member in one of the sister unions. And by sister unions, we are talking about SAG-AFTRA, AGMA, AGVA, and GIAA, which I actually had to look up to see what that was. So you have to be a member for at least a year in one of these unions in order to kind of take advantage of the reciprocity and join equity. So that is just something to know. So a little trivia question here. So what are the four full names of the union? So SAG-AFTRA is obviously the Screen Actors Guild, the American Federation of Television and Radio Artists. So that one most people know. AGMA is the American Guild of Musical Artists. I'm hoping I'm getting these exactly right. AGMA, American Guild of Variety Artists. Definitely it's the musical artists and variety artists are those two. And the GIAA, I had to look up, and it is the Guild of Italian American Actors. Who knew that they were our sister union? So that's exciting. So if you are a full member in one of these other unions for more than a year, you can actually, just by virtue of that fact, join equity. You must be a member in good standing. So you can't be late on your dues or not up to date and just say, well, you were a member. You have to be currently a member in actual good standing right now. You must have worked as a performer under the union's jurisdiction on a principal contract or an under 5 contract, or for at least 3 days of extra background work. That is if you were joining via the SAG reciprocity. So with your application, you include a written statement from your parent union stating you meet all the requirements, and you give them a nice big check of $600 towards your equity dues, which, by the way, is not the full amount of your equity dues. That is just a down payment on your equity dues, and that goes towards your initiation fee. The third way is called the EMC, which is the Equity Membership Candidate Program, which is the program I want to talk to you a little bit about today. So there are 3 steps to becoming an equity membership candidate that you have to do in order to become part of this program. The first sounds like the way you get your first equity contract. You got to get cast or get a position. It doesn't even have to be, by the way, an acting position. It could be an apprenticeship position as like in other areas of the theater there. But you have to get an eligible position at an equity theater that participates in the EMC program. So that is what you have to do. You do the form. You get this from the producer of the show. The union doesn't really do any of that. You return that completed form with the non-refundable $200 registration fee to Actors Equity, and you give that to the producer, and they file it with the union. So that is a simple thing. So, by the way, that $200 application fee ultimately will be applied towards your equity membership fee. So if you want to think about it as you're doing a down payment on your equity fees, you could think about it that way. So the Equity Membership Candidate Program is actually 2 phases. So it is phase 1, which is weeks 1 through 25. You pay that $200 fee, and then after the completion of 25 weeks, you may now join. Or if you decide that, that's your decision-making process. So you either have to join or you have to decide you're moving on to phase 2 for the second 25 weeks. So I want to pause here for a minute and talk about these 25 weeks. So these 25 weeks do not have to be done all at one time. They don't have to be done at the same theater. They don't have to be done on the same show. They don't even have to be done in the same year or the same decade. It's 25 weeks. They could be done in 2-week increments, 3 weeks increments. They could be that you got cast at a theater that it has an EMC program and you did the 3-week holiday show, and then you go back in the summer and you do six weeks in the summer. And so in that year, you got 9 eligible weeks. So that's just something to know. The other thing to be aware of with these weeks is the eligible weeks are only the weeks that equity members are also there doing the things that they're doing, because that's when equity's kind of jurisdiction comes into play. So for example, let's say your child is cast in a show and it's a holiday show or some summer show, and they're going to rehearse the kids for 2 weeks prior to the full cast, the equity members showing up. Those 2 weeks prior to the kind of like equity contracts starting for the other cast members do not count towards EMC weeks. The only weeks that count towards EMC weeks are the weeks that are happening while other equity members are there under contract, basically, if that makes sense to you. So phase 2. So, okay, we finished phase 1, 25 weeks. You can join if you want. You have 6 months to kind of make this decision, either join or move on to phase 2. So now we're at phase 2. It's the second 25 weeks. It's the back half of this. So you have 50 weeks total that you're able to work in an equity professional theater without having to join equity, and while kind of dipping your toe in, and from 25 weeks on, being eligible to join should you want to join. So there's an additional $200 fee for phase 2, also applies to towards your equity membership. And at any time during this weeks 26 through 50, you could say, I'm good, I'm going to join, as if you want to. So that is your option at that point. All right. So a lot of people want to know what theaters participate in the EMC program. It was a little bit of a pain to find that list on the equity site. So I did download it and put it at this URL. You can go right here, and I will repost this later. But if you go to this URL, it will auto email you back the PDF of all of the equity EMC theaters across the country that participate in this program as of now, as far as equity is concerned. So what are the benefits to being in the EMC program? Well, first one is you're getting professional experience, and you're working towards your membership. You're working at a higher level in terms of like you're working at professional theaters, you're working with people who are, I'm assuming, are more experienced than you. So that's a good thing. You're building relationships with other theater professionals who can become your mentors, your, people who bring you back year after year. And that's how a lot of times people will work at these summer theaters or summer stock theaters, and they go back year after year after year, kind of accumulating 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, whatever, from the time they're teenagers, sometimes, until the time they're graduating from a BFA program in college. And they can do that over a course of time. So after you finish your 50 weeks, after you finish your 50 weeks, you have 5 years that eligibility remains from the work that you've done. So you've now put in those 50 weeks over the course of however long it took. Once it's completed, you now have 5 years to take advantage of joining equity. So you can do as much non-union stuff as you want at true non-union theaters. Go out and do as much, community theater, non-union tours, anything like that. You will still be EMC. You will still be eligible to join equity whenever you want. You can still do as much non-union as you want. But what you do need to know is that what you can't do is work as one of those non-equity people at an equity theater. So, like, for example, if it's a local theater that only has 4 actor equity contracts and maybe 1 contract that's equity for the stage manager, but the cast is 20 people. And so everybody else is non union or local hire a lot of times. When it's kids, especially if it's a kid show, they're not really paying them or they're just hiring them as local hire, but it's an equity theater with equity people working there. So what you can't do after 50 weeks is take one of those non-union spots. You would have to say, I finished my 50 weeks. I finished all my EMC programs. You would have to be given an equity contract. So you might not be able to get that position because they may have used those 4 contracts already on other people. So you might not be able to be given one, and you may not be able to do that show. So that is the one potential downside of kind of finishing this. So you also want to be careful not to rush through your 50 weeks before you're really ready to be joining equity. All right. This is what I just did. This is what I just talked about, this 50 weeks. So there are a lot of benefits of being EMC. Number one, if you're in one of the cities that regularly holds equity auditions, that is what we call like an equity office city. So like New York, Chicago, LA. Can't think of what there's probably a 4th one somewhere. But if you're in one of those cities, the auditions are run a very particular way. And if you are EMC, you're a little higher up on the chain of potentially getting seen, not guaranteed to be seen, but potentially getting seen than if you were non-equity. So that is, one of the biggest benefits to doing that. Get to add EMC to your resume. So you look, again, like you've been working a little bit professionally towards increasing your skills. So kids in equity. This is really everybody. I had an interesting conversation today with the Chicago membership person who clarified something that I wasn't 100% clear on myself, which is nobody's actually required to join the union to work on an equity show. So if you're offered an equity contract, you can accept the contract. You can work on that contract. You may have to work on that contract, but you don't have to join the union if you don't want to. So nobody is ever forced to join the union. And so that's an interesting thing to know, because a lot of times there are shows where, it may only be coming through for a couple of, let's say I'm thinking in particular about like Waitress or certain shows that may come around that hire people locally. And it might even be an equity show, but they're hiring maybe the child locally, and they have the option to join the union if they want, because they're being given an equity contract. But most of the time, the parents realize that the kids don't have to join, especially when it's a short-term contract like that. But I don't think everybody really realizes that you can technically work on that contract but not be forced to join if you're not at a point in your career where you feel that you should join, that you still need more time to be building up your resume, need more time to be doing non-equity work. So that is an option that you have. And you could always talk to the membership department. They are lovely. Highly recommend Lynn in the Chicago office in case you ever need a good contact there. I've had a lovely conversation with her today. But yeah, always feel free to ask them questions. So for kids under 14 can request a temporary freeze on their membership to do non-union school or community theater and then reactivate it again. Because again, this goes to the idea that while equity would love to have as many members as they possibly can, they also don't want to accumulate members that need more training and that by joining the union are prohibiting, themselves from being able to do the things that they need to do to build their skills. So if a child ends up joining equity, it's usually because they're in, a show, and the child, it could be Matilda, it could be School of Rock, it could have been Billy Elliot, it could have been any one of a number of shows, that have children in it, but there may not be another show that child is able to be cast in coming right on its heels that they can continue building their skills promptly. So they know that they have to give these kids who become part of the union at a very young age the opportunity to keep developing. Otherwise, they're never going to become, great professional actors. So under the age of 14, they can freeze their membership. They go on like a temporary juvenile freeze, I think is what it's called. And they can go out and do that community theater production or that non-equity production or a different tour that might be non-equity. And when they finish it up, they can come back and say that they are reactivating their membership. And it's free. It doesn't cost you anything to do that back and forth. But you could only do that until you're 14 years old. After 14, you're in, right? So let's say you're 15 and you want to do your school show and your equity, you can request. You do it, but you have to get permission from equity to do it. Do I think they're going to turn you down to do your local high school show? Probably not, but you still have to get permission from equity. What they probably will never give you permission to do is to go do some non-union, tour when you're 16. Probably not. So that's just how you work with the equity membership as a child. Okay. Let's see. So a lot of people, I talked about this a little bit before, but local theaters can, like you can have a local equity theater in your community, anywhere across the U.S., and they're given a specific contract to work under by equity based on a lot of factors, based on the size of the theater, based on, do they have the right kind of dressing rooms? Do they have the right, there's like a million things that kind of like target them into a particular kind of contract, that they're able to work on, and that governs the salaries and it governs a lot of things. It also governs kind of like the ratio for some of these smaller regional theaters of how many contracts they have, which is what I was talking about before, whereas you can have a show in an equity theater that has 20 cast members, but they only have 4 equity contracts. And they are saving those contracts for the hard to find people that they may have to bring in from out of state, they may have to do a very large scale casting. Or they're going to give it to the leads. If they need a particular thing, what they're usually not going to give it to are the kids in the ensemble. So, if it's Annie, will they give Annie the equity contract? Maybe not. Depends if they could find a non-union girl who can do that role locally. But what happens is they pay them very little. They get hired as local hires. Sometimes it's just a small stipend. Sometimes it's, just a smaller non-equity salary. And the adults, it could be the same thing. I mean, usually there's some sort of salary, but it's not going to be what the equity contracts are. So that's why and how that happens. Sometimes regionally, why you see like an equity theater doing some non-equity hiring, and then the kids are local hires and not being offered equity contracts or paid or anything like that. So those are the theaters that you should be asking if they have an EMC program, because that is the exact situation that this is meant to kind of address, which is that they can work and perform and maybe not be paid, but they're almost like an apprentice, at that point. So something to know about. Let's see. I think I talked about this, about if you finished your 50 hours, your 50 weeks rather, doing your EMC program, you cannot accept a non-union contract in an equity theater. Yeah, I did talk about that. All right. So the moral of my story with all of this is don't rush to become equity unless you're in a serious long-term, well-paying contract that it makes sense for you to do it. Even if you work under an equity contract and you don't join and you've paid in, for pension and all of that stuff, that money is actually, by the way, still sitting there for you when you're whatever retirement age will be down the road, 67, 70, 80, whatever it is, it's all still sitting there. And you can go collect it from equity and get that money down at that point, even if you never joined the union, but you worked under an equity contract as a non-union member. So that's something to be aware of. Some fun facts. There is no minimum age to join equity. Even the babies can join when they are those on-stage babies. I wouldn't do it unless it's, really well paying and you felt that there was a benefit to it for you. And again, you are not required to join just because you're offered the equity contract. You could still work under that contract and politely write a letter that gets attached to the contract that says that you are opting to not join at this time because you need to still continue to keep yourself open for non-union opportunities, to keep developing your skills. And you can, at any point while you're working under that contract, change your mind and join. But what you can't do is a year later say, hey, I want to join. I had an equity role a year ago. So you can only join while that contract is in effect. So that's your moment to do. So if you're ready, SAG, although you can join, you must do EMC to work in professional theater. So if you or your child are SAG and they want to go do a union professional show, they have to actually either do EMC or join the union. They can't work non-union. So that's something. All right. So what is the EPA and the ECC? So the EPA is the Equity Principal Audition, and the ECC is the Equity Chorus Call. So those are the two types of auditions that equity holds that people are very, hyper to make themselves get to when they want to know, can I get seen at these equity auditions? So for those people that don't know how this actually works, I want to explain, excuse my dog's making noise in the background there. I want to explain how these auditions actually work for equity members so that you can understand how you fit into the picture as a non-equity or EMC member. So when you are equity and these EPAs and ECCs come up, you can go online 1 week before the audition, and it is like buying tickets to a hot rock concert. So people are queued up in the computer system, and at 12 o'clock, 1 week before an EPA, and at 9:30, 1 week before an ECC, they open up online appointment scheduling basically for equity members. And for EPAs, they're done in 20-minute blocks of time, and I'm spacing on the amount of appointments. I think it's there are 8 slots and they only sign up 6 or something like that. I'd have to get that exact number for you. But they have a certain amount of slots and they allow online appointments for a portion of them, and they save that other portion for on the same day, kind of like walk-in equity people who didn't have a chance to do the online. So if you are waiting in the queue and you don't get an appointment, you know that there is still a minimum of whatever it is, 2 slots or whatever every 20 minutes that are open for kind of the walk-in people who go that day to sign up. So the appointments are run in 20-minute blocks of time. So if I'm talking just the EPAs right now. So if you are a non-equity person or an EMC person and you want to get seen at these equity auditions and you go super early and you sign up on the EMC standby list and the non-equity list, what you need to know is that there's also an equity standby list in front of all of you. So the order of priority is the equity people who have the appointments. Then should those appointments run faster, people not show up, whatever, and those empty spots that still are there to be filled on the day of by equity people, should all of that happen and they have time in any of those 20-minute time blocks, they will then look at the equity standby list. They will then look at the EMC standby list, and then they will look at the non-equity standby list in that order. So getting there early and being on that list higher up is obviously important. What you also have to know is that should you walk out of the room to go to the bathroom and they call your name gets crossed off and you have the opportunity to sign up at the bottom of the list. Nobody can say for you, hey, they just ran out to the bathroom, they'll be right back. It doesn't work that way. You are crossed off. So when you get there, you have to stay there. You have to be prepared to be there the whole time. My dogs are being really annoying. By the way, their names are Ben and Jerry. Okay, back to that. So that's the EPA. The ECCs, when the people sign up online for the ECCs, they're given a number. And so there's a certain number of people that they know they're going to see in each kind of ensemble, chorus, dance, or singing group. And so when you arrive on the day of the audition, and for the ECCs, they read out all the numbers. You kind of check in, say that you're there, you're acknowledged, you're confirmed. if you miss that check-in, you are marked off, a standby is put in your place, and then you have to sign up on the standby list. This is equity people. And again, then there's standby opportunities should there be more room than they anticipate. So the question is, do you go to equity auditions as a non-ec or an EMC, and do you have a shot of getting in? The answers are, depends on the show. If it's not a popular, crazy show and it's a child-only EPA or ECC, meaning they're only doing the child roles on that particular call, then yeah, I'd give it a shot because there's only so many equity kids, right? And they're probably going to get to EMC and they're going to get to non-equity, and they're more inclined to do it because they know they have to look beyond just the union members, because the kids who are union are a function of the specific shows they were in, at a very specific moment in time, and it may not be the right match for the shows that they're casting right now. So they're more, I would say, emotionally inclined to look at the non-equity and EMC people, but they still have to follow the equity rules. So that's the thing to be aware of. So it's still that same process of the online sign-in, the equity standby, then the EMC, and then the non-equity. But the trick or the key is to get there super, super early and be top on that list. And people get there like 2 hours early, 3 hours. I mean, they can get there super early, and the equity monitor is not there. So somebody, whoever arrives first, starts an informal sign-in list, and the equity monitor will usually honor that list in order, that people have been signing up on, and they arrive an hour before, and then it continues at that point. If this is an EPA for a super hot show that has both adults and kids at the same time in the same EPA, the chances of them moving through all of the equity standbys and then all of the EMC standbys to get to the non-equity people are much less, if you can kind of now visualize what that day is looking like. Because there's obviously a ton more equity adults and standby adults and EMC adults and non-union adults all showing up for the audition, and there's not two separate lists. It's not segregated by kids and adults. It's one process. So you're going to have to use your judgment on those about whether or not to go. And any audition, by the way, can decide that under no circumstances are they seeing non-equity people. They have that right. They are not obligated to see, beyond the equity people. So again, you don't know. It depends on the show. It depends on the casting director. It depends on how the day is going. They could start out with one thought, become overwhelmed, and, and that's how it goes. So that's how. If you're doing EPAs and ECCs in other locations, like where the theater is specifically located in other regions, they determine how the audition process is going to go. So they determine if they're going to schedule members for auditions with appointments. They may do it online. They may do just in person or first come, first serve, but that's up to them. For all of these, you must show up with your equity card. If you are equity, no exceptions, and you must be there when your name is called. I can't stress that enough. So I kind of walk through how these auditions actually work. I think we did, can non-equity go to them? Absolutely, you are welcome to try, but you are not guaranteed to be seen. This is the priority order that happens. Equity, who have appointments, equity who are standby, EMC, and then non-equity. That is how it goes. That is my presentation today on equity and EMC and doing these auditions. If you have questions, post them in the comments below, and I will go back in and take a look and try to answer as many as I can. Feel free, and I will also post the link to the EMC theaters. Thank you for joining me.